Hello, my friends. How are you doing today? It's a little dark. Okay, here we go. Not that it really matters, right? Honestly. Okay, so today is Monday, January 21st. I've got a quick and awesome one today for you because this one is actually not based on a specific question. This one is based on an experience I had last week with a client. And one of the things I do as Anna Sabramowitz, the e-learning scenario person, human, is really I produce scenarios that then live online. And one of the things that we were talking about with a client last week was we're talking about designing an e-learning module, which is a sequence of 6 to 8 scenarios, which most times if we're doing it the right way, then the scenarios are about reinforcing a single behavior, a single thought pattern, something that's very is challenging, and somebody can practice making these decisions in a safe space. And at the end, they're pretty sure about where their gaps are. So it wasn't that if you present to people with a single scenario, sometimes you can say, well, they got it right, or they got the right outcome because they guessed right. And yeah, that'll happen. But if you have about 6 to 8 scenarios, if there are gaps in their thinking, you'll quickly discover them. So that's why I say, if you want to use it as a diagnostic tool, then 6 to 8 is great, because they can't really guess 6 to 8 right. And also, the other thing that it does is it gives you a variety of situations where the same concept can be applied, which means that if the first scenario didn't resonate as well, the second, third, fourth one might. So either somebody's going to finally get the drift or really realize they have a gap. And then at the end of that sequence, they're going to look for something more because they're going to feel like they didn't really get the results that they were anticipating. The other thing that came out of this conversation was the fact that this client happens to run 4-day training sessions that these scenarios are supposed to augment. Now, one of the challenges when you're running a 4-day training session, and there's multitudes of them, I bet you if you run your own training sessions, you could relate to this, is one, to actually have enough critical mass of people to run the training sessions, to bring them all together, like especially if you're an organization that has like a dispersed force of people, workforce, and they're all over the world. To actually bring them together, you need a certain amount of people to justify the cost, to justify the trainer getting out there, facility booking, all that other stuff that just is intense. Also, the ability for these people to actually take 4 days off their work to actually do this. And in those cases, it's actually quite difficult, because I think that even if somebody's a new leader, or even somebody who's in a critical position, to lose 4 days of that is a huge challenge, right? So the other thing I talked about with them is the fact that after 2 days, people tune out. And it's not because they want to tune out, but because the overwhelm of the work piling up because they're gone is very probably intimidating for them, because they need to be able to keep up. That doesn't stop. That stuff doesn't stop, right? The work continues. So they're probably someplace else. The other thing is that as adults, as humans, we don't learn for 4 days straight. Like, to be able to have to do that is very, very tiring. And also it's after a while, I don't know if you've ever been to like the Louvre, which is the museum of fine art, where everything from basically all the paintings and art in the world has been shoved into this giant palace. And after about, I think, 2-3 hours, everything looks like a giant blur. Like, that's why everybody kind of like goes to the Mona Lisa, because they're like, oh yeah, I remember that one, and that one will probably stick. But everything else becomes a blur because it's just overwhelmed. So one of the things we came up with, and this is great because I didn't come up with this on my own. My idea was to use scenarios, and then they presented this challenge, which is like, how do we integrate these scenarios into the live session? And I thought, well, considering the fact that you can't really run this live session very often because you don't have the capacity, because people don't want to come out for 4 days and all these other things, like, we thought about this. And I know that There's a lot of people who believe face-to-face is still like the gold standard in some cases, but for 4 days and when everybody else is already thinking about their work, it's not. It really is actually, after the first 2 days when you were building those relationships, you're actually probably hurting some people and turning them off from attending any other training ever, right? So what I suggested is that we take that and space it out over 6 weeks. So we would offer the program every 6 weeks. It would, let's say for the next 6 months, every 6 weeks. And then what happens is the scenarios that we initially designed, they will be used as the starting point for a virtual session for every one of those weeks. So here's what's happening, what's beautiful about that. You take a session now that used to be 4 days. People prep a little bit beforehand. They have that hour to join and discuss the scenario and also discuss it in their context. So not only that they get the consequences in the scenario, but now they get to explore them with peers who are in the same position and also are applying the same procedures in their context. So, a scenario, you have a whole bunch of situations and they're wrapped around certain, let's say, person's experience, day in the life. So you're looking at those situations through the realities and the perspective and the options available to that particular person. So you're trying to make decisions on their behalf. Now, when you bring that into the virtual space, let's say Zoom, which is one of my favorite virtual classroom tools and so awesome to use and easy, then what happens is you get to explore that, reflect on it, which is when real learning happens. And after an hour, you can go away, do some more thinking, but also apply it in your context. So then when you come back the week after, if it's structured right and the workshops are actually planned, then what you can do is actually reflect on the application of that throughout the week. So over the 6 weeks, you're basically revisiting these concepts, re-reflecting on them. And there's nothing wrong with going back to the first scenario and saying, okay, now that you've gone through 6 weeks of this stuff, is it a different kind of decision that you're making? Is it a different kind of context? Is it a different kind of consequence that you get because of where you are at? And do you see how that applies? So what you're doing now is you're structuring this to not only be spaced over time, which is beautiful, it doesn't cause that burnout. The other thing is people are still in a cohort, so they're building that relationship over time. And then they're applying this in the context. So they don't just get a one shot, boom, here we are, here's all the info we've got, now go and be a leader. We're going, okay, here's a nugget. Let's see how that works in the real world. Okay, let's come back. Okay, here's another nugget. Let's come back. So what happens is you get that application over time, reflection over time, building of relationships over time, and also making decisions and learning about the stuff that helps you become a leader, a better leader in your environment. So you're not separated and then brought back in. You're actually making the same decisions in the same environment, which helps retention because as you're thinking about things, you're in the same space as you're making the decisions, as you're experiencing the consequences. So it's actually a super cool way of thinking about this kind of stuff. So if you're considering designing scenarios for your space, do not neglect the opportunity to reuse those same scenarios in a virtual live classroom context. That will augment what you already have. Now, think about this. They used to offer that learning leadership training every 6 months. So if somebody joined 6 months ago, or joined today, they'd have to potentially wait 6 months to attend. And then hopefully nothing came up when they were ready at that point to take on those 4 days off work. Or now, every 6 weeks, there's a new cohort that joins. And if it's 2 people, that's totally cool. If it's 6 people, 20 people, it'll go, right? So that's fantastic. I mean, definitely you want to have some guidelines saying, we want to have critical mass of at least 4 people, because that'll just make it more dynamic, because you'll see things from different people's perspectives. And that's what a good leader does as well, is consider the fact that their style is different from other people's styles and all those other things. But now the cost and the impact is smaller and more frequent, but it is also much more dynamic, and you can actually meet people's needs way more effectively because you're running it every 6 weeks, which is fantabulous, right? So I hope that was helpful to you, because one of the things that I like to do is, you take your skill set that you have, and especially like scenarios. Scenarios can fit in so many different places, but you have to be very careful because they fit in so many places. You have to realize they can't be your single application medicine, right? You have to integrate it with all the other things that are going on. Now, the other thing that came out of us now using scenarios in these 6 weekly little scenario virtual sessions is that most people who are running sessions via Zoom and all those other things, they're not really comfortable doing that stuff. Like, they're great face to face, and they're dynamic and everything, but then when it comes to like hitting Zoom or some WebEx, they have no clue what they're doing, or they're so intimidated by the technology that they lose the workshop idea. And also online, like, you really have to engage people, especially in a workshop way. You have to plan that stuff. Like, you can't just show up and be like, hey, everybody, let's just, let's do some icebreakers. It doesn't work like that. It has to be very, very planned and structured so that that experience on the other end is very engaging. So that's one of the things that came out of this session as well, is not only are we going to build scenarios, not only are we going to integrate these scenarios into a 6-week delivery program, the other thing that we have to do is make sure that each one of those sessions is planned, and 2, that the person who's delivering it is super comfortable delivering it, because that'll make all the difference. When you engage people up front and you're very comfortable with doing that in those first sessions, after about session 2 or 3, when people get over the technology, and now I'm talking about the students, they'll start running those things. They'll get the drift of it. You just give them the information and they'll run with it, because that's how really groups work. But to be able to set that up from the very beginning and get it going, you need to have that facilitator actually be comfortable in setting all those sessions up and running them in that proactive way, and being engaging enough and also hands off enough that when people are comfortable with the tech, they're the ones producing all the different reflections and content that you really need them to do, because that's, it's not about feeding people info. It's about having them come up with ways that they can use it and tying it into their own context, because that makes it stick. So I hope that was useful to you. If you have any questions about scenarios, if you have any questions about how to use scenarios, how to draft your own scenarios, all that stuff, please put it in the comments, or after I finish the live, just post it underneath the video. And I do one of these every single day, Monday to Friday. Weekends, not yet. We'll see. Right now, I like my weekends off. So if you have any questions about those, post them in the comments area, or even in here. And then what I'll do is I'll answer it next time, unless I have something where I'm like, oh, this was a breakthrough and I got to share it with you. Then I'll do that as well. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And if I don't see you very soon in another video, I will probably see you tomorrow during my next live. Okay, so take care and see you next time, friend. Bye.